His grandfather's final wish haunted the family for half a century. "Swear to me the parlor floor will stay untouched." Through 5 decades of harsh winters, family gatherings, and countless whispered theories, they kept their solemn promise. Now, as Samuel lifted the ancient floorboard on a crisp autumn morning, his weathered hands shaking, the truth he uncovered would reveal a legacy far greater than anyone could have imagined. Inside the historic Richardson farmhouse, Samuel knelt on the parlor floor, his heart pounding against his ribs as he carefully worked the crowbar under the edge of a wooden plank. The autumn wind whistled through the gaps in the century-old windows, carrying with it the earthy scent of the surrounding wheat fields. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight streaming through the window, the same window where his grandfather used to sit in his favorite rocking chair, watching the wheat fields sway in the summer breeze while smoking his cherrywood pipe. The house had stood proudly for over a century, a silent sentinel witnessing the changing seasons across the vast Oklahoma plains. Its white-painted walls had yellowed with age, the wraparound porch had weathered countless storms, and the tin roof had developed a symphony of distinct rattles and creaks. But the parlor floor, that sacred ground his grandfather had protected so fiercely, remained unchanged. The same oak planks that had supported 4 generations of Richardsons still creaked their familiar song with every step, each board telling its own story of countless family gatherings, children's first steps, and quiet Sunday afternoons. Samuel wiped the sweat from his brow, despite the autumn chill that seeped through his thick flannel shirt. The weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily on his shoulders, like the storm clouds that gathered on the horizon, promising another early winter. For 50 years this floor had been untouchable, a mystery that had sparked endless debate. At family gatherings, holiday dinners, and late-night conversations, some claimed old Andrew Richardson had lost his mind in his final days, addled by the grief of losing his wife Mary. Others insisted he'd hidden his life savings beneath the boards, remembering how he never trusted banks after the Great Depression. A few even whispered about buried secrets from the Dust Bowl era, when desperate times had driven good men to desperate measures. The ancient floorboards seemed to hold their breath as Samuel positioned the crowbar. Scattered around him lay the tools of his intention, a flashlight, a hammer, a pry bar, and his grandfather's old leather notebook, its pages yellow with age. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains his grandmother had hung decades ago, casting intricate shadows across the worn wood. These same curtains had witnessed countless family celebrations, arguments, reconciliations, and now, finally, the moment of truth. The board groaned in protest as Samuel applied more pressure, its ancient nails reluctantly releasing their grip. After half a century of faithful service, the sound echoed through the empty house like a ghostly warning, making him pause. What if he was wrong? What if there was nothing beneath these boards but dust and broken dreams? Or worse, what if his grandfather had good reason for wanting this floor untouched? The weight of generational trust pressed down on him heavier than any physical burden he'd ever carried, but it was too late for doubts now. The family farm was struggling, caught between the relentless march of modernization and the stubborn pride of tradition. The bank had been making increasingly urgent noises about foreclosure, and this year's drought had been the worst since the 1930s. The same resilient soil that had provided for generations of Richardsons was now cracking under the merciless sun, threatening to take with it not just their livelihood, but their entire way of life. If there was any hope of saving his heritage, any chance of honoring his grandfather's true legacy, it lay beneath these boards. As the first plank finally gave way with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the decades, Samuel's breath caught in his throat. There, in the darkness beneath the floor, something metallic glinted in the beam of his flashlight, But it wasn't gold or silver that made his hands tremble. It was something far more extraordinary. Reaching into the cavity, his fingers brushed against cool metal and crumbling paper, items that would finally explain why his grandfather had gone to such lengths to protect this simple farmhouse floor. In that moment, as dust swirled around him like ghostly witnesses to his discovery, Samuel understood that he was about to uncover more than just hidden treasures. He was about to unlock a story that would change everything they thought they knew about Andrew Richardson and the true meaning of his mysterious last request. The truth that lay beneath these weathered boards would reveal a legacy far more valuable than anything they could have imagined, a secret that had been worth waiting 50 years to discover. His hands trembled as he reached deeper into the darkness, the flashlight beam revealing more glimpses of what lay hidden below. Through the small opening, he could see what looked like carefully wrapped packages, their contents still obscured by decades of dust and shadow. The mystery that had captivated 3 generations of Richardsons was about to be solved, and Samuel could feel in his bones that nothing would ever be the same again. What he found that day would not only save the farm, but would also reveal a story of foresight, wisdom, and love that spanned half a century, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones that take a lifetime to understand. Andrew Richardson was the kind of farmer that belonged to a different era, a time when a man's word was his bond, and the land was more than just a business investment. For nearly 5 decades, he worked the rich soil of western Oklahoma, his calloused hands intimately familiar with every acre of the 1,000-acre spread that had been in the Richardson family since the land run of 1889. Local farmers often said that Andrew could predict rain just by the way the wind touched his face, and his uncanny ability to sense approaching storms had saved more than one harvest over the years. Born in 1898, Andrew had learned farming at his father's knee during the prosperous years following World War I, when wheat prices soared and the Oklahoma soil seemed capable of producing endless bounty, but it was the harsh lessons of the 1930s that truly shaped him. While other farmers lost everything to the ravages of the Dust Bowl, Andrew's innovative techniques and stubborn determination helped him preserve not only his own land, but assist neighboring farms as well. He pioneered windbreak plantings and soil conservation methods that other farmers initially mocked, but later rushed to adopt. The Richardson farmhouse stood as a testament to his success, its 2 stories rising proudly above the rolling wheat fields like a lighthouse on an endless sea of grain. Andrew had built it himself in 1945 after returning from serving as an agricultural advisor in Europe during World War II. Every nail, every board, and every window had been carefully chosen and placed with his own hands. The parlor, with its rich oak flooring, had been his particular pride, though no one understood why he'd insisted on installing the floor himself, working late into the night by lantern light, refusing all offers of help. In the farming community of Millard County, Andrew Richardson's opinion carried the weight of gospel. Young farmers sought his advice on everything from crop rotation to equipment purchases, and even the agricultural extension agents from Oklahoma State University would consult him before making their recommendations. His methods might have seemed old-fashioned to some, but his results spoke for themselves. The Richardson farm consistently produced the highest yields in the county, and his wheat was known for its superior quality. But it wasn't just his farming prowess that earned Andrew respect. He was known throughout the county for his fairness and generosity. During the difficult years of the 1950s drought, he helped many neighboring farms survive by extending private loans and sharing his equipment. He kept detailed records of every transaction in his leather-bound notebook, but was known to forgive debts when families fell on particularly hard times. "The land remembers kindness," he would say, "and so do people." What few people knew about Andrew was his passionate interest in economics and world affairs. Every evening after the day's work was done, he would retire to the parlor with his pipe and his newspapers. He subscribed not only to the local papers, but also to the Wall Street Journal and several international agricultural journals. His family often found him there, surrounded by papers covered in his neat handwriting, making calculations and predictions that he never fully explained. Mary, his wife of 45 years, would bring him coffee and sometimes sit with him, though. She claimed his economic theories went right over her head. She was the only one who noticed how his interest in financial matters intensified after their son Thomas was born in 1948. Andrew began spending more time in the parlor, often late into the night, and made frequent trips to Oklahoma City that he wouldn't explain. The community saw Andrew as a simple farmer, but those who knew him well recognized a keen intelligence behind his weathered features. He had an almost prescient ability to anticipate changes in the agricultural market, often making decisions that seemed counterintuitive at the time, but proved wise in the long run. When other farmers rushed to expand in the 1960s, Andrew maintained his 1,000 acres, focusing instead on improving his soil and infrastructure. Time, he would say, proves all things. Perhaps what made Andrew truly remarkable was his ability to balance tradition with innovation. While he respected the old ways of farming, he wasn't afraid to embrace new ideas when they made sense. He was among the first in the county to install irrigation systems in the 1960s, but he integrated them with traditional dry farming techniques that his father had taught him. This blend of old and new became his trademark, earning him both respect and occasional bewilderment from his neighbors. As the years passed, Andrew's connection to the land seemed to deepen. He could often be found walking his fields at dawn, checking the soil with hands that knew every subtle variation in texture and moisture. He taught his son Thomas everything he knew about farming, but there were times when he seemed to be holding something back, as if saving some crucial piece of wisdom for the right moment. The Richardson's parlor became a gathering place for the community, where farmers would come to discuss crops, weather, and the changing times. The oak floor beneath their feet witnessed countless conversations, debates, and decisions that shaped the agricultural community. No one suspected that this same floor would one day hold the key to understanding Andrew Richardson's true legacy, a legacy that went far beyond his reputation as a successful farmer and respected community leader. The summer of 1973 cast an unusual shadow over the Richardson farm. While the wheat fields swayed golden and heavy with promise under the Oklahoma sun, inside the farmhouse, a different kind of harvest was approaching. Andrew Richardson, at 75 years old, lay in his bedroom, his once robust frame now frail against the white sheets that Mary changed daily. The cancer that had started in his lungs, despite never having smoked anything but his cherished pipe, had spread quickly, leaving doctors shaking their heads and family members struggling to accept the inevitable. Even in his weakened state, Andrew's mind remained sharp as ever. His leather notebook never left his bedside, and he would often be found scribbling in it with hands that shook but refused to rest. Visitors noticed how his eyes would drift toward the parlor across the hall as if keeping watch over some unseen treasure. The oak floor that he had installed with such care nearly 30 years ago seemed to weigh heavily on his thoughts. On a particularly stifling July morning, when the thermometer already read 90 degrees by dawn, Andrew called his son, Thomas, to his bedside. The room was quiet, except for the gentle whir of the electric fan Mary had positioned near the window. Thomas, who had just turned 25 that spring, sat in the wooden chair beside his father's bed, noting how the morning light cast deep shadows across Andrew's weathered face. "Son," Andrew began, his voice carrying the same quiet authority, It had held all his life despite its newfound weakness. "There's something important we need to discuss." He paused to catch his breath, each word seemingly measured and deliberate. "It's about the parlor floor." Thomas leaned forward, confusion crossing his features. Of all the things he had expected his father to discuss, the running of the farm, the upcoming harvest, the family's future, the parlor floor seemed oddly trivial. But there was something in his father's eyes, an intensity that commanded attention. "I need you to promise me something," Andrew continued, his hand reaching out to grasp his son's arm with surprising strength. "The floor in the parlor must remain untouched. No repairs, no replacements, no changes of any kind. Not for 50 years. The specificity of the time frame caught Thomas off guard. 50 years, Dad. Why so long?" Andrew's grip tightened slightly. "Promise me, Thomas. 50 years. Exactly. Mark it down. July 15th, 1973. When 50 years have passed, then and only then can the floor be examined, not a day sooner." His eyes held a mixture of urgency and something else. Was it hope? The room seemed to grow smaller as the weight of the request settled between them. Through the window, the distant sound of tractors in the fields provided a familiar backdrop to this unusual moment. Thomas studied his father's face, searching for some hint of explanation, but Andrew's expression remained resolute. "What's under there, Dad?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why 50 years?" A slight smile crossed Andrew's pale lips. "Some things need time to mature, son, like winter wheat that needs the cold to grow strong. Trust me on this. Will you give me your word?" Thomas felt the years of respect and trust between them crystallize in that moment. His father had never steered him wrong, had taught him everything from the proper depth to plant wheat seeds to the importance of treating everyone, from hired hands to bank presidents, with equal respect. If Andrew Richardson said wait 50 years, there had to be a reason. "I promise, Dad," Thomas said firmly. "Not a board will be touched until July 15th, 2023. Relief flooded Andrew's features, and he relaxed back against his pillows. "Make sure you write it down, son. In fact," he gestured toward his leather notebook, "bring me that book." With trembling hands, Andrew opened the notebook to its final pages and wrote the date, followed by the details of their agreement. Below it, he added something else, a series of numbers and notes that Thomas couldn't quite make out. Then he tore out the page and folded it carefully. "Put this somewhere safe," he instructed. "You'll need it when the time comes." His voice grew softer, more urgent. "And Thomas, this stays between us. The floor, it's more important than you. No, sometimes the best gifts are the ones that take patience to unwrap." That evening, as the sun set over the wheat fields in a blaze of orange and purple, Andrew Richardson called his family to his bedside one last time. He spoke to each of them, Mary, Thomas, Thomas's wife Sarah, and their young son Samuel, sharing words of wisdom and love. But he never mentioned the floor again, taking its secret with him as he slipped away quietly in the early hours of the following morning. The next day, as neighbors and friends gathered to pay their respects, more than one person remarked on the strange peace that seemed to settle over Andrew's features, as if he had accomplished some final, important task before departing. No one noticed Thomas's thoughtful glances toward the parlor, or the way he carefully placed a folded piece of paper in his strong box that evening. The promise had been made. The clock had started ticking, and the Richardson family's greatest mystery had begun its 50-year journey toward revelation. The years immediately following Andrew Richardson's passing tested the family's commitment to his mysterious request in ways they couldn't have anticipated. The beautiful oak parlor floor, which had previously been just another part of their home, suddenly became the center of endless speculation and occasional tension. Every creak and groan of the wooden boards seemed to echo with hidden meaning, and visitors couldn't help but notice how the family carefully arranged furniture to minimize wear on certain sections. Thomas took his promise seriously, perhaps more seriously than anyone expected. Within the first month, he had carefully documented the exact position of every board, photographing the entire floor and making detailed notes about its condition. He converted the photographs into a precise diagram in a fresh notebook, marking areas that already showed signs of age or wear. Some called it excessive, but Thomas remembered the intensity in his father's eyes that last morning, and he wasn't taking any chances. The first real test came during the harsh winter of 1974, when a frozen pipe burst in the wall adjacent to the parlor. Water seeped under the baseboards, and Mary insisted they pull up the affected floorboards to check for damage. Thomas refused, instead hiring specialists to access the pipe from below through the basement. It cost nearly 3 times what a simple floor repair would have, but he stood firm. The incident sparked the first of many heated family discussions about the practicality of keeping Andrew's request. "Your father was a practical man," Mary argued one evening after the pipe incident had strained their already tight budget. "He wouldn't want us throwing good money after bad just to keep a promise about some old floorboards." But Thomas would simply shake his head, remembering how his father's hand had gripped his arm that summer morning, the urgency in his voice. When he specified the 50-year waiting period, Sarah, Thomas's wife, initially supported her husband's dedication. But as the years passed and maintenance costs mounted, even she began to question the wisdom of their promise. "We could at least pull up one board," she suggested during their 5th winter in the house, "just to see if there's anything that needs protecting." But Thomas wouldn't hear of it. He had given his word, and in his mind, that was final. Young Samuel, only 6 when his grandfather passed, grew up watching his father's careful stewardship of the floor. The mystery became part of his childhood, shaping his understanding of family loyalty and the weight of promises. He would often lie on the old boards, pressing his ear against the wood, as if trying to hear its secrets, creating elaborate theories about what his grandfather might have hidden beneath. The community's reaction to the Richardson family's strict adherence to Andrew's request ranged from amusement to concern. Some neighbors admired Thomas's dedication to his father's wishes, while others whispered that grief had made the family peculiar. The local paper even ran a small piece about it in their local legends column, speculating about possible treasures or dark secrets that might lie beneath the protected boards. The most difficult moments came during family gatherings, when relatives, who hadn't seen the house in years, would inevitably bring up the floor. Uncle James, Andrew's younger brother, was particularly vocal about his skepticism. "My brother was a shrewd man," he'd say, usually after a few drinks at holiday gatherings, "but he could also be stubborn as a mule. Maybe this is just his way of having the last laugh." But Thomas noticed something that others didn't, how Uncle James's eyes would linger on certain sections of the floor, and how he would sometimes fall into thoughtful silence after making his jokes. It made Thomas wonder if his uncle knew more than he let on, though he never worked up the courage to ask directly. The first decade after Andrew's passing brought other challenges too. The farming crisis of the late 1970s hit the region hard, and many neighboring farms went under. The Richardson farm survived, partly due to Andrew's conservative financial planning, but there were lean years when selling the house and moving to more modern accommodations would have made economic sense. Yet Thomas kept his promise, working extra hours and taking side jobs to maintain the old homestead. By 1983, 10 years into their 50-year wait, the parlor floor had become such an accepted family quirk that they rarely discussed it anymore. Thomas had developed a routine of careful maintenance that protected the boards without actually touching them. Strategic placement of rugs, regular cleaning with special non-damaging products, and constant monitoring of humidity levels too. prevent warping. Sarah eventually came to see the floor as a symbol of something larger than just a promise. It represented their family's dedication to tradition and their respect for the wisdom of previous generations, even when that wisdom wasn't immediately apparent. She began telling friends that the mystery of the floor had taught their children valuable lessons about patience and trust. As the first decade rolled into the second, the Richardson family settled into a pattern of protective stewardship over their unusual inheritance. The floor's mystery became woven into the fabric of their daily lives, a constant reminder of Andrew's final request and the legacy he had left them to protect. Little did they know that this was exactly what Andrew had hoped for, a lesson in patience and trust that would span generations, preparing them for the revelation that would come half a century later. The 1990s brought new challenges and a deeper layer of intrigue to the Richardson family's floor mystery. By this time, Thomas had developed a meticulous system for documenting everything related to his father's request. His original notebook had expanded into 3 volumes, filled with observations, maintenance records, and increasingly complex theories about his father's intentions. The turning point came during a spring cleaning session in 1992, when Sarah discovered a hidden compartment in Andrew's old desk. Inside was a collection of financial newspapers from the 1960s and early 70s, each marked with Andrew's distinctive handwriting. The margins were filled with calculations, cryptic notes about economic cycles, and repeatedly circled dates, all exactly 50 years into the future. This discovery sparked a new wave of speculation about the true nature of Andrew's request. "Look at these dates," Thomas pointed out to Sarah one evening, spreading the yellowed papers across their kitchen table. Dad wasn't just making random predictions, he was mapping something out, something long-term. The papers revealed Andrew's deep interest in economic patterns, particularly those spanning half-century intervals. One notation, barely legible, in the margin of a 1971 Wall Street Journal, caught their attention. "The cycle completes in 2023. Patience yields the greatest return." The mystery attracted unexpected attention when a local historian, Dr. Margaret Chen, visited the farm while researching agricultural practices during the Dust Bowl. She became fascinated by Andrew's story and spent months studying the family's records. Her research revealed that Andrew had made several trips to Oklahoma City and Kansas City in the years before his death, visiting banks and investment firms. However, no records existed of any accounts or transactions. "Your father wasn't just a farmer," Dr. Chen told Thomas during one of her visits. "He was an economic theorist in his own right. These calculations," she gestured to the old newspapers, "they show an understanding of long-term market cycles that was decades ahead of his time." Her academic interest lent credibility to the family's dedication to preserving the floor, though it also brought unwanted attention from treasure hunters and curiosity seekers. The family had to deal with several attempted break-ins during the mid-1990s, prompting Thomas to install a sophisticated security system. One night, they caught 2 men trying to pry up floorboards in the parlor. When questioned by police, the would-be thieves claimed they'd heard rumors about gold bars hidden beneath the floor. The incident led Thomas to realize that his father's secret, whatever it was, needed better protection. Samuel, now in his 20s, began spending more time at the farm, particularly in the parlor. His engineering background gave him a new perspective on the floor's construction. He noticed subtle differences in the wood grain patterns that suggested some boards had been specially selected and placed with precise intention. Using early digital photography, he created detailed maps of these patterns, convinced they held some kind of code. "Grandpa was too methodical for this to be random," Samuel explained to his father one evening, showing him enhanced images of the floor patterns. "See how these boards form subtle geometric shapes? And look at the spacing of the nails. It's not consistent with standard construction practices of the 1940s. His observations added another layer to the growing body of evidence that Andrew Richardson had been planning something extraordinary. The family's dedication to preserving the floor had unexpected benefits. During the renovation boom of the 1990s, when many historic farmhouses were being modernized, the Richardson home maintained its original character. Architectural preservationists began studying the house, particularly impressed by the pristine condition of the parlor floor. One expert noted that the oak boards were of exceptional quality, cut from old-growth forests that no longer existed. Sarah's garden club meetings became a forum for local folklore about the floor. Stories circulated about strange lights seen in the parlor windows late at night, though Thomas dismissed these as reflections from passing cars. Others claimed they could hear counting or clicking sounds coming from beneath the floorboards during full moons. The tales grew more elaborate with each telling, much to the family's amusement and occasional frustration. Uncle James, now in his 80s, made one final visit to the farm in 1998. As he sat in the parlor, running his weathered hand along the floorboards, he finally shared a memory with Thomas. "The summer before your father died," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I found him in here late one night. He was talking about cycles and patterns, about how some things need time to grow, just like wheat needs winter. I thought he was getting senile, but now—" He left the thought unfinished, but his eyes held a knowing look that stayed with Thomas long after his uncle's passing the following year. By the turn of the millennium, the mystery of the Richardson floor had become deeply woven into local culture. School children wrote essays about it. Artists painted interpretations of what might lie beneath, and at least one country song was written about the patient farmer's secret. The family took it all in stride, knowing that the truth, whatever it might be, was still decades away from being revealed. Thomas, his hair now grey and his hands showing the same weathered strength his father's had, continued his faithful stewardship of the floor. Every creak and groan of the boards seemed to speak to him, carrying whispers of his father's wisdom across the decades. As the halfway point of their 50-year wait approached, he felt an increasing sense that they were guarding something far more valuable than mere treasure. The dawn of the new millennium brought unprecedented challenges to the Richardson farm and its mysterious floor. The year 2000 arrived with more than just Y2K concerns. It marked a turning point in the family's resolve to keep their 50-year promise. The economic landscape of farming had changed dramatically, and maintaining an aging farmhouse was becoming increasingly difficult in the face of industrial agriculture's rise. Thomas, now in his early 50s, found himself at a crossroads. Modern farming operations were buying up neighboring properties, consolidating them into massive technology-driven enterprises. The pressure to sell mounted as corporations offered increasingly attractive sums for the Richardson land. Each offer came with the same caveat: the house would need to be demolished to make way for more efficient use of the land. "Your father was a great farmer," said Jim Cooper, a representative from Midwest Agricultural Enterprises, during one particularly tense meeting. "But times have changed. You can't compete with modern methods using 50-year-old techniques." The irony of the time frame wasn't lost on Thomas, who sat at his kitchen table, politely declining yet another generous offer. The financial strain began to show in subtle ways. The house's exterior needed painting, the roof developed leaks, and the ancient heating system groaned through each winter. Sarah started taking extra shifts at the local hospital to help make ends meet, while Thomas supplemented their income by doing mechanical work for neighboring farms. Every spare dollar went into maintaining the property, with special attention always paid to protecting the parlor floor. Samuel, now married with a young daughter of his own, found himself torn between honoring his grandfather's wishes and his growing family's needs. His wife, Rebecca, struggled to understand the family's dedication to what seemed like an increasingly burdensome promise. "We could buy a new house outright with what they're offering," she would argue during their late-night discussions. "Your grandfather would understand. Times are different now." The parlor floor itself seemed to sense the mounting pressure. New creaks developed, and certain boards began to show their age more prominently. Thomas spent countless hours researching preservation techniques, consulting with historical restoration experts, and developing innovative ways to protect the floor without actually modifying it. He installed a sophisticated humidity control system and carefully monitored the basement beneath for any signs of structural issues. In 2003, a severe tornado swept through the region, causing extensive damage to many local farms. The Richardson house survived largely intact, but the roof over the parlor sustained damage. Water began seeping in, threatening the precious floor below. The insurance company's assessment was clear. The entire roof needed replacement, and they would only cover it if all floors were inspected for water damage, including the parlor floor. This crisis forced the family to make difficult decisions. Thomas took out a second mortgage to pay for repairs without insurance, choosing to protect the floor's secret at significant financial cost. The decision strained family relationships. Sarah's siblings, who had long supported their dedication to Andrew's wishes, began suggesting it was time to let go of the past. During this period, an unexpected ally emerged. Dr. Chen, the historian who had studied Andrew's economic notes years earlier, published a paper about agricultural economics during the post-war period. In it, she dedicated a section to Andrew Richardson's prescient understanding of long-term economic cycles. Her academic interest brought legitimacy to the family's guardianship of the floor, suggesting there might be more to Andrew's request than mere sentiment. "Your grandfather's notes show an extraordinary understanding of something economists call the generational wealth cycle," Dr. Chen explained during a visit in 2005. He was tracking patterns that most experts didn't recognize until decades later. "Whatever's under that floor, I'm convinced it's part of a larger plan." The most difficult moments came during family gatherings, when the younger generation would inevitably question the wisdom of maintaining the old house. Samuel's daughter, Emily, now 7, would often play in the parlor, her innocent questions about the floor cutting straight to the heart of their dilemma. If great-grandpa was so smart, why did he make you wait so long? Thomas found himself wondering the same thing during sleepless nights, as bills piled up and maintenance costs mounted. But then he would remember his father's words about patience, about how some things needed time to mature. He would recall the look in Andrew's eyes that final morning, the quiet confidence that suggested he knew exactly what he was asking of his family. By 2010, nearly 40 years into their wait, the Richardson farm had become something of an anomaly, a small, family-owned operation surviving in an era of corporate agriculture. Local media occasionally ran stories about their persistence, often focusing on the mystery of the floor. These stories attracted both support and skepticism, with some praising their dedication to tradition, while others suggested they were clinging to an outdated promise at their own expense. As 2015 rolled in, the countdown to the floor's revelation began to feel more real. With just 8 years remaining until the promised date, both anticipation and pressure mounted within the Richardson family. The aging farmhouse stood as a testament to their dedication, though years of financial strain had left their mark on everything except the meticulously maintained parlor floor. Thomas, now approaching 70, had begun to feel the weight of his years. His hands, once steady and strong like his father's, had developed a slight tremor. The doctors called it essential tremor, but he worried about what it might mean for the farm's future. More pressing was his concern about being there when the time finally came to reveal what lay beneath the parlor floor. The promise to his father had defined nearly his entire adult life, and the thought of not seeing it through weighed heavily on him. "You'll be there, Dad," Samuel would reassure him during their Sunday dinners. Richardsons are known for their longevity. But Thomas had started sharing everything he knew about the floor with his son, just in case. He brought out all 3 volumes of his documentation, the yellowed newspapers with Andrew's notes, and most importantly, the original folded paper from his father's last day. The farm faced its greatest challenge in 2017, when a massive drought hit the region. Crops withered in the fields, and many neighboring farms finally gave in to corporate buyouts. The Richardson farm survived, but only barely. The strain showed in every corner of the house, except the parlor. Thomas had installed a state-of-the-art climate control system specifically for that room, drawing criticism from family members who couldn't understand prioritizing a floor over more pressing needs. It was during this drought that something unexpected happened. While reviewing his grandfather's old papers for the 100th time, Samuel noticed something they'd overlooked. In the margins of a 1971 newspaper, Andrew had written a series of numbers that matched current commodity prices with uncanny accuracy. Further investigation revealed more predictions, all tied to the 50-year mark. "Look at this," Samuel showed his father, spreading the papers across the kitchen table one evening. Grandpa wasn't just making random notes, he was tracking patterns, predicting market cycles. These numbers, they're almost exactly what we're seeing now, 50 years later. The discovery brought new respect for Andrew's foresight, though it also deepened the mystery of what might be hidden beneath the floor. The local community's interest in the Richardson floor mystery experienced a revival when a popular YouTube channel featured their story in 2019. The video went viral, attracting attention from historical societies, preservation groups, and unfortunately, more treasure hunters. The family had to install additional security measures, including 24-hour surveillance cameras, to protect the parlor from would-be explorers. Emily, now in her early 20s and studying economics in college, developed a new appreciation for her great-grandfather's economic theories. She spent her summer breaks poring over Andrew's notes, correlating them with modern economic trends. Great-grandpa wasn't just a farmer, she would tell visitors. He was an economic prophet who understood something about long-term cycles that we're only beginning to grasp now. As 2020 arrived with its global challenges, the Richardson farm proved remarkably resilient. The family's conservative financial approach, inspired by Andrew's example, had left them better prepared than most for unexpected crises. The parlor floor had become more than just a mystery. It was a symbol of their family's endurance through difficult times. The final years of waiting brought an almost unbearable sense of anticipation. Thomas began having dreams about his father and the day he made his promise. In these dreams, Andrew would smile knowingly, but never reveal his secret. Sarah, who had stood by her husband's dedication for so many decades, started making detailed plans for the day they could finally investigate beneath the boards. By 2022, the Richardson farm had become something of a pilgrimage site for people interested in family histories and unsolved mysteries. Local schools would bring students on field trips to learn about agricultural history and the importance of keeping promises. The parlor floor, despite its age, remained remarkably well preserved, protected by decades of careful stewardship. The family began preparing for the upcoming revelation with almost religious devotion. Samuel, drawing on his engineering background, created detailed plans for how to carefully remove the boards without damaging whatever might lie beneath. They consulted with preservation experts, archaeologists, and even bank vault specialists, wanting to ensure they handled the floor's secret with appropriate care. As the final months of their 50-year wait approached, Thomas found himself spending more time in the parlor, sitting in his father's old chair, running his hands along the smooth wooden boards that had defined so much of his life. The floor's familiar creaks had become a language he understood, though its ultimate secret remained tantalizingly out of reach for just a little while longer. July 15th, 2023, dawned with a clarity that reminded Samuel of his grandfather's. Descriptions of perfect harvest days. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parlor floor, the same floor that had held its secrets through half a century of patient waiting. The Richardson family had gathered early, each member feeling the weight of history pressing down on them as heavily as the summer heat. Thomas, now 75 and using a cane but sharp as ever, sat in his father's old chair, clutching Andrew's leather notebook. Sarah stood beside him, her hand resting supportively on his shoulder. Samuel had meticulously prepared for this day, laying out specialized tools on a workbench he'd set up in the corner of the room. His wife Rebecca and their daughter Emily, now a graduate student in economics, documented everything with cameras and notebooks. "We should start where Grandpa used to sit," Emily suggested, pointing to the area near the window where Andrew's rocking chair had worn subtle patterns into the wood over the years. Samuel nodded, remembering all the times he'd watched his grandfather in that spot, reading his newspapers and making his mysterious calculations. The family had decided against making this a public event, despite intense interest from the media and local community. This was a family matter, just as it had been 50 years ago when Andrew made his request. Dr. Chen, now retired but still keenly interested in the Richardson mystery, was the only outsider invited to witness the revelation. Samuel began his work with almost surgical precision. He'd spent months studying historical construction techniques and consulting with preservation experts to ensure they could remove the boards without damage. The first board, the one with the subtle difference in grain pattern he'd noticed years ago, resisted slightly, then surrendered with a soft groan that seemed to echo through the decades. The family collectively held their breath as Samuel shone his flashlight into the space beneath. The beam revealed something that made his hand tremble, a metal box, its surface dulled by age but still intact, carefully positioned between the floor joists. Beside it lay several sealed mason jars and what appeared to be stacks of documents, protected by oilcloth. "Wait," Thomas called out as Samuel reached for the box. "There's an order to this. Your grandfather was methodical about everything." He opened Andrew's notebook to the final entry, written on that fateful day in 1973. Inside was a carefully folded piece of paper with instructions written in Andrew's steady hand. Following his grandfather's written directions, Samuel carefully removed each item in a specific sequence. The mason jars came first, 3 of them, each containing perfectly preserved documents and what looked like newspaper clippings. Next came the oilcloth packages, which revealed themselves to be detailed maps of the farm and surrounding properties, annotated with Andrew's distinctive handwriting. The metal box proved to be a challenge, its lock having fused slightly over the years. But Andrew had thought of this too. The combination was written in code in his notebook, another testament to his careful planning. When it finally opened, the contents left the family speechless. Inside were several compartments, each meticulously organized. The first contained gold coins, carefully wrapped and dated, but these proved to be just the beginning. The second compartment held stock certificates, some from companies that had grown into corporate giants over the past 50 years. The third contained land deeds and mineral rights documents that Andrew had quietly acquired in the years before his death. But it was the letter resting on top of everything that brought tears to Thomas's eyes. Written in his father's hand, dated the day before he died, it began, "To my family, who had the wisdom to trust and the patience to wait." The letter revealed the full scope of Andrew's foresight. He had spent years studying economic cycles, particularly those spanning 50 years, what economists now called the Kondratiev wave. He had noticed patterns in land values, commodity prices, and industrial development that few others in his time had recognized. Emily, with her economics background, was the first to grasp the full implications of her great-grandfather's planning. He wasn't just hiding wealth, she explained to the family as she reviewed the documents. He was positioning it to grow over time. These investments, the land rights, even the timing of the 50-year wait, it was all calculated based on economic cycles he had observed. As they continued to examine the contents, the true magnitude of Andrew's legacy became clear. The value of the items he'd hidden had multiplied many times over during the 50-year wait, just as he had predicted. But more than that, his careful notes revealed how he had structured everything to provide for the farm's future in the age of industrial agriculture. The days following the floor's revelation brought waves of understanding that washed over the Richardson family like the summer storms that would sweep across their wheat fields. Each document they examined, every note they decoded, revealed new layers of Andrew Richardson's extraordinary foresight and deep love for his family's future. The discovery proved to be not just a collection of valuable items, but a carefully orchestrated symphony of planning that spanned half a century. The full inventory of what lay beneath the floor took nearly a week to properly catalogue. Beyond the immediate discoveries, they found detailed instructions for how to manage the assets in the modern era. Andrew had not just preserved wealth, he had created a comprehensive plan for sustaining the family farm in a future he knew would be drastically different from his time. His preparations were so detailed that he had even included instructions for dealing with modern banking systems and digital transitions. The stock certificates proved particularly remarkable. Andrew had invested in companies that were barely known in 1973, but had become industry giants by 2023. There were early shares in technology companies that had grown exponentially, energy corporations that had pioneered sustainable resources, and agricultural businesses that had revolutionized farming. His notes revealed that he had studied emerging industries of his time, predicting which ones would become crucial in 50 years. The margins of his notebooks contained detailed analyses of company structures, leadership patterns, and innovation potential that showed an almost uncanny ability to spot future market leaders. "Look at this," Emily exclaimed one evening, poring over her great-grandfather's market analysis. He predicted the rise of digital technology, sustainable energy, and automated farming, not the specific companies, but the industrial shifts. In 1973, the margins of his notebooks were filled with calculations about compound interest and market cycles, showing how he had planned for his investments to mature precisely when the family would need them most. Each prediction was backed by careful research, economic theories, and historical pattern analysis that would have seemed revolutionary in his time. The mineral rights documents proved equally valuable. Andrew had quietly purchased rights to lands that, decades later, had become crucial for both traditional and renewable energy sources. He had mapped out areas that would become valuable for wind farms, solar installations, and natural gas, resources that weren't even considerations in his time. His surveys of the land showed that he had studied geological reports, wind patterns, and solar exposure data to make these decisions, demonstrating a level of research that went far beyond simple speculation. Thomas spent long hours in the parlor, sitting in his father's old chair, reading through Andrew's personal letters to the family. The floor was more than a hiding place, he explained to Samuel one evening, his voice thick with emotion. It was a lesson in patience, in understanding that some things need time to reach their full potential, just like the wheat needs winter. To grow strong, he knew his plan needed decades to mature. The letters revealed a man who understood that his greatest gift to his family wouldn't be the wealth itself, but the wisdom to manage it properly. Dr. Chen's academic analysis of Andrew's economic theories attracted attention from major universities. Mr. Richardson developed what we now call long-term cyclical investment theory, she explained during a family interview. He understood economic patterns that economists wouldn't formally recognize until the 1990s. His journals show a sophisticated grasp of market cycles that was decades ahead of his time. Her research revealed that Andrew had been studying global economic patterns, technological advancement trajectories, and agricultural development trends from sources across the world. The gold coins, while valuable, were actually the smallest and part of the legacy. They served more as a backup plan, a hedge against economic uncertainty. The true wealth lay in Andrew's strategic investments and land acquisitions, all carefully chosen to reach maturity when modern farming would face its greatest challenges. Each investment had been selected not just for its potential return, but for its role in a larger strategy to protect and sustain the family's agricultural heritage. Rebecca, who had once questioned the family's dedication to the floor's mystery, found herself humbled by Andrew's planning. He wasn't just thinking about money, she noted while helping to organize his documents. He was thinking about sustainability, about keeping the farm viable in a changing world. Everything he did was about protecting the family's way of life. The documents revealed how Andrew had studied climate patterns, soil conservation techniques, and emerging agricultural technologies to ensure the farm could adapt to future challenges. Perhaps most moving were the personal messages Andrew had left for each generation. He had written letters predicting the challenges they would face and offering guidance from across the decades. His words about corporate farming, environmental changes, and technological advancement read like prophecies, but they were actually the result of careful study and deep understanding of historical patterns. Each letter contained not just predictions, but practical advice for navigating the changes he foresaw. The discovery had profound implications for the Richardson farm's future. The resources Andrew had set aside provided the means to modernize their operations while maintaining their independence from corporate agriculture. His instructions included detailed plans for adapting the farm to changing climates and new farming technologies, while preserving the core principles that had guided their family for generations. The plans were so comprehensive that they included contingencies for various economic scenarios, climate changes, and technological developments. Emily took charge of implementing her great-grandfather's long-term financial strategies, applying her economics education to understand and execute his plans in the modern context. Great-grandpa didn't just leave us money, she explained during a family meeting. He left us a blueprint for sustainable family farming in the 21st century. She found that his investment strategies aligned perfectly with modern sustainable investment principles, proving that his vision extended far beyond simple profit. The Richardson family's discovery became impossible to keep completely private, despite their best efforts. News of what lay beneath the mysterious floor spread through the farming community like wildfire, transforming from a local curiosity into a national story about foresight, patience, and family legacy. The media dubbed it the 50-year harvest, a name that captured both the agricultural roots and the long-term nature of Andrew's plan. Major news networks began camping outside the farm's entrance, hoping to catch glimpses of the family or the famous floor. Financial magazines requested interviews, particularly interested in Andrew's early investment strategies and economic predictions. Agricultural journals wanted to study his farming techniques and soil conservation methods that had kept the land productive through decades of changing climate conditions. The family found themselves facing an unexpected challenge, protecting Andrew's legacy while sharing its valuable lessons. We need to be careful Thomas cautioned during a family meeting. Dad didn't preserve all this just for it to become a media circus. They decided to take a measured approach, sharing select insights while keeping the most personal aspects of their inheritance private. Dr. Chen proved invaluable during this period, helping the family navigate the academic interest in Andrew's economic theories. She organized a small symposium where Emily presented some of her great-grandfather's work on long-term market cycles. The event attracted economists from major universities who were astounded by the sophistication of Andrew's analysis conducted decades before modern economic modeling tools were available. What makes Andrew Richardson's work remarkable, Dr. Chen explained to a packed lecture hall, isn't just that he made accurate predictions. It's that he developed a comprehensive theory of generational wealth cycles at a time when most economists were focused on quarterly returns. He understood something fundamental about the relationship between time, patience, and value creation. The Richardson farm became a different kind of agricultural pioneer, demonstrating how traditional family farms could adapt to modern challenges while maintaining their independence. Agricultural students began visiting to learn about Andrew's integrated approach to farming, which had somehow anticipated many of the sustainable practices becoming essential in the 2020s. Local schools developed a curriculum around the Richardson story, teaching children about long-term thinking and the value of patience. The family allowed limited tours of the farm, carefully controlling access to the parlor while using the story to educate visitors about agricultural heritage and economic literacy. Security became a major concern as treasure hunters and opportunists began showing up, hoping to find other hidden caches on the property. The family invested in a state-of-the-art security system and worked with local law enforcement to protect their property. They even had to hire a legal team to handle the constant requests for interviews, book deals, and movie rights. Emily found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker at economic conferences, where she shared how her great-grandfather's investment principles could be applied to modern challenges. The 50-year wait wasn't arbitrary, she would explain. It was based on his understanding of how generational wealth transfer could be optimized through careful timing and patience. The most unexpected outcome was the effect on the broader farming community. Other family farms, inspired by the Richardson story, began developing their own long-term sustainability plans. A movement emerged, focused on preserving agricultural heritage while embracing innovation, exactly what Andrew had envisioned half a century earlier. Samuel worked with agricultural preservation groups to document traditional farming techniques that his grandfather had recorded, many of which were proving valuable in an era of climate change and sustainable agriculture. The Richardson farm became a living laboratory where old wisdom and new technology worked in harmony. The story attracted attention from environmental groups when they discovered Andrew's prescient notes about soil conservation and climate patterns. His journals contained detailed observations about weather changes and their long-term implications for farming, observations that aligned startlingly well with modern climate science. A year after the discovery, the Richardson family gathered in the parlor for a special occasion. The floor had been carefully restored, each board returned to its place after yielding its long-held secrets. Thomas sat in his father's old chair, now accompanied by 4 generations of Richardsons, including his great-granddaughter Grace, born just 3 months after the revelation. The room looked much the same as it had 50 years ago, but its meaning had transformed entirely. The creaking floorboards no longer held mysteries, but they carried something perhaps even more valuable, a profound understanding of foresight, patience, and family dedication that spanned half a century. Your great-great-grandfather built more than a farm, Thomas explained to Grace as she lay on the floor tracing the grain patterns with tiny fingers. He built a bridge across time, connecting his generation to yours. The baby smiled, too young to understand, but somehow sensing the warmth of legacy that filled the room. The Richardson farm had entered a new era. Using Andrew's careful instructions and resources, they had modernized their operations while maintaining the core principles he had established. Solar panels now gleamed alongside traditional wheat fields, and advanced irrigation systems worked in harmony with his old soil conservation methods. The farm had become a model of how family agriculture could thrive in the modern world without losing its soul. Emily had compiled her great-grandfather's economic theories into a book, The 50-Year Farmer, Lessons in Generational Wealth and Patience. It became required reading in several university economics programs, praised for its insights into long-term economic cycles and sustainable wealth creation. But more importantly, it preserved Andrew's wisdom for future generations. The parlor floor had been officially registered as a historical landmark, protected for its unique role in American agricultural history. A small plaque now hung beside it, reading, "Here lies the proof that patience, wisdom, and love can span generations." Andrew Richardson's 50-year legacy revealed 2023. Perhaps the most profound impact was on the family itself. The discovery had transformed their understanding of inheritance. "We thought we were protecting a floor," Samuel reflected, during a family dinner, "but we were really learning the most valuable lesson a family can learn, that true wealth isn't just about money, it's about the wisdom to think beyond our own time." The Richardson family established a foundation dedicated to helping other family farms develop long-term sustainability plans. They shared Andrew's principles of patient investment and careful stewardship, helping countless other farming families navigate the challenges of modern agriculture while preserving their heritage. Thomas, now approaching his final years, found peace in knowing that his father's vision had been fulfilled. Dad knew that farming wasn't just about the next harvest, he would say. It was about planting seeds that would grow for generations. The sight of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren learning to work the land using both Andrew's wisdom and modern techniques brought him profound joy. The floor's secret had long been revealed, but its lessons continued to resonate. Each creak and groan reminded them of the patience it had taken to reach this point, of the trust that had bound them together across decades. The parlor became a gathering place where stories were shared, wisdom was passed down, and new generations learned the value of thinking beyond their own time. As the sun set on another day at the Richardson farm, casting long shadows across the parlor floor, the family understood that Andrew's true gift hadn't been the wealth he'd hidden beneath the boards. It had been the lesson that some things, wisdom, patience, family bonds, need time to reach their full value. The floor had been more than a hiding place. It had been a teacher, showing them that the most precious inheritances are the ones that require faith, trust, and the wisdom to wait. The mystery of the Richardson floor had been solved, but its legacy would continue to grow like wheat in fertile soil, nourishing generations yet to come. In the end, Andrew Richardson had done more than preserve his family's future. He had taught them how to create their own.